From having little to no experience to focusing purely on money, here are reasons why influencers are destroying boxing. Let's face it, the likes of KSI, Logan Paul, and other YouTube influencers have taken over the sport of boxing. And depending on where you stand, either way, it's making the sport look bad, or it's actually helping the sport. I mean, it's all subjective. Ever since YouTubers like Joe Weller and KSI held a hyped-up boxing match, which became really popular and attracted lots of views from their YouTube followers, influencer boxing hasn't looked back. It wasn't until the bout between KSI and Logan Paul that people started catching on and asked themselves, where's this going, really? And is it good for the sport? Or is it ruining the professionalism boxing is known for? But even before these questions could be answered, the king himself, Floyd Mayweather Jr., jumped into the game. And we were like, okay, maybe this is serious. Mr. Money Mayweather himself challenged Logan Paul, and as expected, the fight elevated influencer boxing to a whole new level. Initially, it was mainly matches between YouTubers, most of whom were boxing amateurs, who only had like 3 to 4 months of training. But once UFC former champions joined in, the competition blew up. While this drew more fans, it also drew more criticism. Sure, these YouTube boxers may have millions of followers, but that doesn't mean they have any real boxing skills. In fact, most of them have little to no experience, yet they're able to sell out arenas and make millions of dollars for their fights, which kinda pisses off professional boxers, most of whom have worked their asses off to hone their skills and perhaps become the world champion. I mean, these fights are nothing more than amateur exhibitions with no real competition or skill on display. There are no belts to fight for, no regulations whatsoever on how the fights are judged. It's all just a big show designed to make money, especially off the backs of the real fighters. But at the same time, and hear me out, despite the bad rap they're getting, these glorified influencer fights may perhaps be a good thing for the sport, or so they claim. For example, and let's be realistic here, such fights have been bringing in a whole new audience, something that traditional boxing hasn't done, especially in recent years. We all remember the era of Mike Tyson and Muhammad Ali, at least for the older generation. But the Gen Zs knew nothing about boxing. I mean, they knew nada, nothing. And so with the rise of influencer boxing, this has been very exciting for the younger generation. Before the likes of KSI, iDabbbz, Joe Weller, and the Paul brothers became popular, no one ever paid attention to traditional boxing. The sport was actually considered an old man sport, which is kind of borderline insulting, but true. Let me ask you this. Before Anthony Joshua burst into the boxing scene, have you ever watched any of the WBO fights? And did you know who the heavyweight champion was? I guess not. With influencer boxing soaring in popularity, especially in the past few years, we've witnessed a rise in the younger generation's embrace of the sport. Other than watching their favorite YouTuber or TikToker stepping into a ring for a boxing match, they just enjoy seeing two people beat the shit out of each other. They don't really care if the fight is too amateurish. They don't care if there are no official rules and regulations. And whether we like it or not, despite the dangers of boxing matches, this has resulted in more fans tuning in to watch boxing, traditional or not. Which makes me wonder, is influencer boxing a fad that's gonna fade, or is it here to stay? Once again, this is very subjective. It depends on how you look at it, and from which vantage point you're standing from. A YouTube boxer who reaps the benefits of such hyped-up fights may have a completely different perspective from a traditional boxer. That's because the latter has to work very hard. They've got to train for decades and go through blood, sweat, and tears to get the kind of exposure influencer boxers seem to enjoy. Basically, YouTube boxers like Gibb, Salt Pappy, Deji, KSI, McBroom, etc. may not care that much. It's all about money in the bank. As long as they're getting paid, they're good. Also, since the fights are 100% amateur level, there's no pressure on the boxers to be technically savvy. They only need a few months of training before they step into the ring. And that's where the bad side of influencer boxing comes in. These YouTubers seem to forget that boxing is a dangerous sport. Even though it's rare, there have been cases of retired boxers experiencing head injuries, which is due to the many years of getting hit in the head. And even worse, there have been cases of boxers dying in the ring. This is something YouTube boxers have no idea about. And if they do, their fans have no clue. I guess influencer boxing is still very new. We're yet to witness the worst of boxing, especially if it's unregulated. You can't claim to have become a great fighter after just 3 or 4 months of sparring with a trainer. What's even worse? Most of these influencer boxers have only 2 or 3 fights to their name. None of them has had more than 10 fights. However, some folks may counter-argue by saying, hey man, it's a new niche in combat sports. Shouldn't we give them time? Well, I get it, but isn't that the idea? Aren't we supposed to be patient and build this thing gradually? I mean, we're treating these influencer boxing events with so much hype and glamour. It feels like we're watching experienced boxers with more than 50 fights to their name. This is plain stupid. By glorifying these influencer boxers, we're actually putting them in danger. I'm not a pessimist or anything, but I feel like, perhaps, until someone dies in the ring, and God forbid, that we'll finally see the dangers of letting every Tom, Dick, and Harry into the ring. Don't get me wrong, I respect anyone who steps into a ring to fight, especially if you're a complete amateur. It's a very courageous endeavor to take. I wouldn't do it myself, and hats off to anyone courageous enough to put on those gloves, but can we just make sure they've gone through enough training? The skills, the technical nuances of boxing are very crucial. Sure, influencers have a huge following, and yes, their boxing events attract millions of dollars, but it doesn't mean we should let them fight. The only reason we keep seeing these influencer boxing matches is money. The numbers don't lie. While traditional boxing matches average about 600,000 pay-per-view, the KSI versus Logan Paul match attracted more than 1.3 million pay-per-view. That's like double the figures. And since pay-per-view costs about $10 to $20, it means the match brought in more than 200 million. That doesn't include the gate tickets. I mean, that's insane. This must be the reason why promoters of traditional boxing like Matchroom, DAZN, and Mayweather Promotions had to join the bandwagon. They're actually responsible for the subsequent influencer matches such as Jake Paul versus former UFC bigwig Ben Askren, which attracted more than 1.5 million in PPV. Then there's Jake Paul versus Tommy Fury, which attracted about 800,000 PPV. Jake even claimed to have made more than $30 million, and that's despite losing by a split decision. Once again, it's not about winning, but more about the money. It's a shame because Jake Paul was increasingly becoming more of a real fighter and less of an influencer. Therefore, even though influencer boxing is supposed to help traditional boxing, this is something we're yet to witness. The whole influencer boxing thing is a dangerous thing, and we have to be appreciative of the limelight it brings to boxing. But we have to be careful. If these hyped-up amateur fights are not regulated, then we're up for something we might regret. I agree with the concept of using social media platforms. They're great at promoting fights, but we shouldn't be supporting inexperienced fighters. It shouldn't be more about the money. Rather, there should be a system in place. Rules and regulations these influencers have to follow. It shouldn't be anyone fighting with anyone. Safety should come first. So, there you go. Despite the financial benefits of influencer boxing, the downsides are obvious. And even though we haven't experienced anything dire, we need to put protective measures in place. These influencer boxers need experience. The money is good, it's great, no doubt, but we shouldn't look away when influencers are destroying boxing.